I've got hurt feelings. I've got hurt feelings. I've got hurt feelings. I've got hurt feelings. Let's get it started today. Oh man, it has been quite an eventful few days. You know, to be honest, the day yesterday started off a little rough. I lost a deal that I was very sure I was going to get. And you know, losing a deal, that happens in business. It's usually not that big a deal. But when you're so sure you're going to get it and then you don't, it's just very, very hard to accept. So I was feeling kind of down. But then, of course, the whole events on Twitter yesterday happened. By the way, I'm suspended on Twitter. That was the result. Oh, man, I almost got my feelings hurt yesterday. Somebody called me a Nazi or said that I was a Nazi supporter or something like that. And, you know, over the years, I've been called racist, white supremacist, and, you know, whatever. That it happens, you know what I mean? At this point, if you're not called a racist or a white supremacist at least once a quarter, I can't trust you. It's just that simple. I can't trust you. But I've only been called a Nazi a few times, and so it almost hurt my feelings. Almost. But not quite. The first time I got called a Nazi, if you remember, it was Joe Carter. Definitely not a Fed, Joe Carter. The ironclad evidence that Joe Carter had that I was a Nazi was that I did not rebuke someone on Twitter that had commented on my thread. I didn't rebuke them, and that was enough for Joe Carter to call me a Nazi. And as it turned out, I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. Somebody screenshotted what he was talking about for me, and as it turned out, I had that person blocked. So, in Joe Carter's weird, definitely not a Fed mind, it's enough to be called a Nazi for you to not respond to someone on Twitter that you have blocked. Anyway, in fairness, though, he did repent of that and apologized for it, so I can't really hold it against him. But, yeah, that was the first time I got called a Nazi, and I think that's the only other time besides yesterday, which was quite hilarious. In any case, we're not going to talk about that. If you're interested, it's a really funny thread that I have on Twitter. I'm suspended, but I think my stuff is still up there. I got the guy that I was interacting with, I'm fairly certain he's the one who got me suspended for a tweet I did about transsexual nationalism, except I called it tranny nationalism, so I guess that was my big sin. I called it tranny nationalism. Anyway. But yeah, so there we go. That's what I spent my day. My mood just picked right up. In fact, I believe that yesterday I created the best video I've ever created in my entire life, and it's on my Twitter feed if you are interested. It just combines different things that are happening, and it's just wonderful. But in any case, we are going to continue the good faith debate today. I don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm going to try to keep my mouth shut as much as possible and let this person explain himself to the principal. He's in the principal's office.
That will affect their ability to develop in the same way.
Something's happening here. What is happening here? Oh, I see what's happening. I've got my Bluetooth on my phone set up, and it's blocking the Bluetooth on my computer. Let's continue.
Way that we have. Although the other piece that's worth keeping in mind here, if you look at something like the Paris Agreement, which was passed a few years ago, I read it recently, the whole thing. I was struck by how contextualized it was.
He's so gay. I was reading the Paris Accords, and I was just taken aback. Every mannerism that he has, every turn of phrase, every way he presents himself, it's just as gay as it could possibly be. Oh man, it's him and the whole Davenant crew and the ironic guy, Stephen Wedgeworth, all these guys. They're just so flippin' gay. I was
makes
struck
strong
by the
distinctions
Paris Accords
between what the UN is asking of developed countries versus what it's asking of developing countries. So the major global agreement on climate change is actually not telling developing countries, you don't get X, Y, and Z. It is rather saying that as this is a global problem, we need to work on it together. Developed countries have to carry more of the weight because they have already gotten to a certain established level where they probably can absorb more of the body blow that some of these things are going to be for us.
Look at his little hands. It's like, oh, and they can absorb the little body blow. And, oh, I was struck. I was struck by the Paris Accords.
Developing countries, we're going to take a different approach because we do want them to be able to develop economic...
Somebody was asking me the other... I know I said I wouldn't interrupt so much, but hey, here we are. This is my channel. Somebody asked me the other day, like, why, like, how do I pick and choose, like, who to respond to seriously and who to just, you know, mock mercilessly? And it's really easy. I mean, like, if you approach me seriously, I'll take you seriously. If you approach me like an idiot, I'm just gonna answer a fool according to his folly. When Big Eva provides the Paris Accords guy, I'm gonna point out that he's gay, and his opinion is therefore invalid.
In certain ways, develop certain infrastructure, healthcare, etc.
Allegedly. I heard that somewhere.
So it's not, I mean, that's the Paris Agreement. This is not some fringe scientist somewhere that no one's listening to. So I don't think that the choice being put to people is no sub-Saharan Africa, no South Asia, no South America, you can't have X, Y, and Z. The issue is rather, we have to think differently about how we build as climate changes. This was something that was evident in Europe last summer. A lot of Northern Europe's not made for that kind of heat. So they're going to have to retrofit a lot of buildings in the near future, and probably a lot of people are going to start buying air conditioning in the near future.
He's very fixated on this air conditioning thing. It's very, very, very important to him. They're going to have to buy more air conditioners. Can you believe it?
Developing countries, while also recognizing the overall challenge that we're facing globally.
Let me ask a question right there, because we're talking about the Earth warming.
See how he kicked his little leg up there with his little flip flop? Okay, sure. And he's like just like the way a girl would do it. It's just everything is so effeminate. It's so ridiculous. Let's let him continue. I think I've made my point. He's not very masculine. That's the point.
A lot of people would say,
and he's very concerned about the climate.
I mean, the Earth's temperature rises and falls. We know it's been much colder than it is, and it's been much warmer than it is. We don't have the history to know if this is how much we're contributing to it. And then on the hurricane front, our city got hit last week by a hurricane, but there are those who would say we don't have enough history to know if they're really more intense. And yes, they're more expensive just because more people live there. How do you respond to that?
All right, well, those are all some salient points. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not like we think you can't know anything about how some of this stuff works, but we definitely can't be sure enough based on how long we've been studying, you know, how reliable previous records were and stuff like that. We just don't have anywhere near the evidence to justify or to warrant the draconian ideas that this little schlub over here is proposing. Like the force of law to be brought into it, it's going to require a lot more than just, you know, we've been looking at the models for the last few decades and that kind of thing. It's really not as open and shut as he wants it to be. He needs it to be settled science. He needs it to be open and shut. It's not that way, though. And so that's a very good question. You know, we don't really have the assurance here that this is necessary and the things you're proposing are going to hurt a lot of people. And it's not just developing countries, like he said. Of course, it always trickles down. He oversimplifies things so much. It's like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to let the developing countries still develop, but the developed countries aren't going to get to develop. Yeah, you don't think these guys are supposed to be intelligent. Like, you don't think that if you cut yourself at the knees as the Americans cut themselves at the knees, that's not going to have a trickle down effect to all the countries that we support, you know, economically, militarily, all that kind of stuff. You don't think that's going to have an impact? If you don't, you're a complete idiot. He's lying for the regime, though, so he gets it. He's just a liar. So, anyway, it's a good point. You know what I mean? It's not that we can't know anything about how weather works. It's just that we don't have. It's not the way he's making it seem, where it's just like a one-to-one. The greenhouse effect is going to kill us all unless we do carbon credits. Like, it's not like that. That's not how it is. So anyway, let's see how he challenges this. Here's my prediction. He's not going to explain himself at all. He's just going to repeat talking points. That's my prediction of what this guy is going to do. Because he's thinking in slogans. That's why. He's thinking in slogans. Let's continue.
Into the air for 200 plus years. And we know what that does. So are there other things that might be driving it on the margins? Sure, I would grant that. But I think we know what CO2 does, and we know that we're putting a lot of it into the air. So it seems reasonable to me to think that a large part of the problems we're seeing as temperatures rise and as all these knockdown effects happen when you have drier vegetation and more fires and warmer water and more intense hurricanes, I don't think it's a great stretch that requires computer models to prove to suggest that we would be influencing those things. And so certainly I'm concerned
now
about
he doesn't even need the computer
developing
models.
world
He just
being able to
knows.
continue to develop.
He just knows.
I'm also concerned about many of these countries being deserts in the not that distant future, where the people are just going to become climate refugees. We've already seen some of this in those parts of the world, actually. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of I think there's trade-offs here, as you said, but I think the trade-offs run in a lot of different directions.
So at the end of your argument,
All right, so he did exactly as I said. He just basically repeated the propaganda, and he added a few things. Oh, climate refugees, like just a bunch of propaganda. He didn't respond to it at all. He didn't respond to the challenge at all, and that's not surprising. So let's see what he does next. I think that probably if going by the rest of this debate, this guy will probably have some pretty good things to say in response to his non-answer. In fact, he might even call out his non-answer, which, again, doesn't usually happen in good faith debates, but in this one, might.
argument, you made the point that free markets create more care creation, not less.
Right.
Is there any, and you alluded to the fact that maybe there were some places we could double click there. Would you
Yeah,
want to
sure.
pull on that string?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that, because it is related to a lot of what Jake was just saying. Jake, you seem to think that free markets aren't enough. They're not doing enough. So we need law and regulation to nudge maybe industry in the right directions. I think from my perspective, you're taking far too dim a view of the dynamism and ingenuity of markets. So just in the last decade,
Yeah, of course he is.
Private industry has invented a way of reducing carbon emissions for energy by 50% over coal. 50%. Now, no one told them to do this. There was no regulation that said, hey, big oil companies and oil drillers, you guys need to do this. This was industry on its own, invents a way to cut carbon emissions by 50% over coal by way of directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing for natural gas. And so 50% over coal is going the right direction. Were they cheered? Was there a
Allegedly.
big celebration? Was there a parade in New York City? Wow, private industry. Were they thanked? No. Actually, what happened was they have been opposed and had nothing but roadblocks from start to finish, from
Of course.
permitting to extraction to transportation to refining and to export.
Yeah, this is a great point, because it's not just that Jake has too dim a view of private industry, but he also has too bright a view of government. Government always stands in the way of this kind of innovation. They often will outlaw doing the right thing. I don't know if you've heard of this, but in certain cities, it's illegal to feed the poor in parks because they name health codes or something like that. But if you're caught handing out sandwiches to poor people in the park or homeless people, you could get a fine for that. Like government is always there to screw things up. Government exists to reward their donors, their supporters, their cronies, and to punish everybody else. And so if this company was trying to develop a certain technology to limit carbon emissions, government would of course be right there to stand in their way to make it harder, because they've got certain preferred industries that donate money to their campaigns and stuff like that. And and all of that. But in Jake's weird universe, the benevolent government is always doing the right thing, and it's using its monopoly on force to do the right thing always. It's just not how it is, especially in these days. You know what I mean? Like the potentially the most evil party in recent history is the Democratic Party, and they're the ones that are interested in all this climate change stuff. I don't know. I mean, like, they want to kill babies, and they want to spread transsexual, ism everywhere, and they're pedophiles and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. I mean, like, call me crazy, but maybe they don't have our best interests in mind with this climate change stuff as well. I don't know. I mean, call me nuts. Call me crazy. And when it comes to corporations, do corporations always do the right thing? No, they don't. But the thing is, corporations are people too, and they're competing with each other. And so if everybody wants, a car with lower emissions, and that's what people want because they don't like living in a cloud of smog, they don't want, like when I go fishing, sometimes I'll pick up garbage on the bank because I don't want to fish in a place where there's garbage everywhere on the bank, and nobody pays me to do that. I just do it. Sometimes I don't do it. Sometimes I do it. But it's like the point is like they're in they have to live here too. So company, if company A is creating a car with less emissions that'll create less smog, so everyone can be happier, and company B isn't. If people really desire that, and I think personally that they do. And they could figure out a way to do it in an affordable way, and it's not just a money-making scheme. Like, so much of this green energy stuff is just a money-making scheme. then they'll do it. And they don't need government to stand in their way or to predict that, this is what they have to do and stuff like that. Government is very poor at predicting the right thing to do. They do ham-fisted harebrained stuff, like saying, oh, we got to have this many electric cars by this time. And then people are like, rushing to figure out how to do this, and then they do it poorly, and then there's shortages, and then there's more child laborers in cobalt mines in Timbuktu or wherever they get the cobalt and stuff like that, and that's how you end up with all these travesties. It's just we don't need the government to tell us what's what when it comes to stuff like this. We really don't. We really don't, especially when the science is so thin. And it is. The science is actually thin. And it's thin because Jake Meador didn't even attempt to try to tell you it wasn't. He just repeated the propaganda again by saying, we know what carbon does.
They're facing barriers. And yet that's an example of industry actually, without a nudge, doing something that is going the right direction. Clearly the right direction. The actual geographic footprint now of oil and gas drilling has been exponentially.
Jake doesn't give a rip about the environment, really, because what God says, this is a Christian debate, right? We're Christians here, right? We believe the scripture. What God says pollutes the land. What God says leads to weather calamities and things like that. If you look at the scripture, is things like child sacrifice, things like homosexuality, things like usury. That's what God says pollutes the land. That's what God says will lead to him coming in wrath and economic calamity and climate calamity and things like that in the Word. So if Jake really did care about this stuff, then he would be for abolition of abortion, and he would punish women who seek abortions with the death penalty and doctors who provide abortions with the death penalty. He would be seeking to use the force of law. Alexa, stop. He would be seeking to use the force of law against the homosexual movement and against the transsexual movement, because there is very clear law in God's law that tells us what justice looks like in those situations. Divorce and adultery and all of these kinds of things, usury, stealing, everything. Jake would be coming out hard on that stuff, but instead he's like, well, God, Kuwait, it's 140 degrees in Kuwait and the streets are melting. By the way, I've heard that was false. He just made that up. I have no idea if it is or not, but it's not surprising that a guy like Jake would lie, just because that's what he does. That's what people like this do. They lie.
Improved because of directional drilling, for example. So I think that we should look at the full picture. I think that actually industry is interested in more environmentally responsible ways of extracting energy. So that's one.
Of course it is. Of course it is, because they're competing for market share.
And all that they entail. That meant private property, risk and incentives, and so forth.
What's happening, dear?
Provides more.
Can't hear anymore. Something's happening. I lost Bluetooth. This happens on my computer sometimes. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. Well, I lost my Bluetooth. I can't hear anymore. So you know what? We could. I don't know. I don't know if I should do this. Hold on.